Okay. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Jess Mink. I'm one of the directors of engineering at Auth0, which is a distributed identity company. This talk is primarily targeted at managers and people who are responsible for determining other people's comp. However, if you're an engineer or some other type of individual contributor, you can take notes and then coach your manager and put pressure on your HR department to make sure things happen well. Cool. So first off, real talk. It's really scary being a manager and actually accepting responsibility for the fact that you're determining how much money another person makes, whether they have a job, whether they have a promotion. And it can be really, I've seen a lot of new managers shy away from that responsibility and try not to have to face that. And then they wait until performance review time and they surprise their employees and they don't end up giving fair comp. So this is something to lean into, to embrace that terrible awkwardness. And we can have conversations over beers about whether this is the way the system should work. But while it's set up like this, let's make sure we take care of the people who we're responsible to by having conversations throughout the year. So how many of you all have gotten terrible, inactionable feedback like this when you went for a raise or a promotion? Yeah, it sucks. So let's not be that jerk. How do we go about making sure that we can give people really valuable feedback? So when you think about feedback, there's 3 types that people tend to look for. One is praise, and that's kind of easy as a manager. You just have to pay attention and tell people exactly what they did well. Fine. Coaching, it's a little harder, but we can figure that out, find a place where someone's weak, and sit down and work with them about how to maybe do it better. The third one, evaluation, which is helping someone think about their whole role and whether they've done all the pieces of it and which parts they're strong in and which parts are weak. Trying to do that in a precise, actionable, and consistent way, especially consistent across time and other managers in the company, isn't something you can just wing, right? That's something you really need a structure in place so that people get that good feedback. And if they don't have that feedback, it can create a real sense of uncertainty, right? So career ladders is a great way to do that. This is kind of an old school style of career ladders. Some people like to do career ladders with using a Trello board. There's many different ways to represent it. I just do it simple. I tend to work at startups, so I tend to come in, there's nothing, let's get something set up. If you work at larger companies, you probably have a much fancier way of representing it. But however your career ladder looks, how the heck do you use it? What do you do with a career ladder when you're trying to manage someone? So the way I like to work a career ladder is I make it be a conversation. I sit down with the person and we talk through each of the elements and what does this mean to you? How do you think you're doing? Or, hey, you're crushing it on this one. This is one of your biggest strengths and I want you to coach other people on the team on this. Or, this is not a place you're really strong, and I think it's the flip side of your strength over here. How can we mitigate it? Can we set up the team so that's not a problem, right? So going through these, asking questions, making sure you really are on the same page about what these things mean. And as I'm having these conversations with people, I'll color it. Red is, we should make a goal about this. Let's flag this as something that we might make a goal about or make a mitigation strategy around, yellow for something in progress, green for the crushing it, blue for, shoot, I need to give you an opportunity. You haven't had a chance to demonstrate that. That's on me. And this isn't a fast conversation. It can take weeks. I've had it be a month of one-on-ones, right? Going through this slowly and getting different insights. But when you do that, you're focused on growing the person, right? And you're coming out with a shared understanding of where they stand. And one key piece here is you don't want to force someone to check every single box, right? If you're looking at this all the time and trying to get someone to check every box and rule lawyering the colors, you're going to get people to focus on their weaknesses, and you're going to lose what makes them awesome. So I like to promote people when they're at 80 to 90% of their current level and when they've gotten some of the next level. The exact percentage of the next level doesn't really matter. Just be consistent across your company. It could be 40, 25. Make something up. Be consistent. But that space allows your career ladder to represent what actually matters as a company. And if someone didn't have a particular opportunity or they're a slightly different shape than you envisioned, they can still progress. You're not holding someone back. So again, the goal of going through a career ladder is to build shared understanding rooted in growth, trying to help someone grow. It's not something where you just sit down and go like, well, I think you're a 3.5% on this, right? Like, that's not going to be a productive conversation. So there's probably some smart aleck in the room being like, so this talk was titled, Let's Talk About Money, and all you've been talking about is career ladders. Okay, we can talk about money. So raise your hand if you've ever found out you were being paid significantly less than your peers, or more, right? Something grossly unfair. Sorry, yeah, it sucks. Like, the shout out words, like how did that make you feel?
Demoralizing.
Yeah.
Not worth it.
Yeah, I quit every time that happened, really shortly after. So I'm not gonna put up with that. So let's not be that jerk, right? If we're not careful about this, it's easy to do accidentally. So how do we go about doing that? The way I like to do it is to set up salary bands. So this is actual data for Atlanta that I had my HR department pull. So if you work at a small company or a startup, your HR department will have access to tools, usually from an accelerator or from investors, where they can actually look up for your company's stage, how much revenue you have, how much funding you've gotten, your geographic location, your title, how much do people tend to pay, right? And the data set might be small, you may have to fudge it a little, but they can pull industry data for your company as to what's fair comp. And then, or what's the market comp? And then for larger companies, what your HR department can do is go ahead and map your titles to Radford numbers, and then use that to figure out what typical pay is across the country and adjust for cost of living and stuff like that. So they can pull these numbers. The 65, 75, and 85% here are 85th are percentiles. So this is the 65th percentile of software engineer ones in Atlanta. 85th, right? 100th percentile is whoever gets paid the most in the entire city. So when you're pulling this data, it's useful to have a conversation about your company and where you want to set the band. If you're a super mission-driven nonprofit who's like maybe struggling to make payroll occasionally and has tons of applicants, maybe you set your pay band to be 25 to 50% of market where you are. If you're at a fintech company that's raking it in and has a hard time getting anyone to decide to work for you, maybe you set it to like 80 to 95% of market, right? So you want to think about your company at its funding stage, how hard it is to attract people, for how you want to set the band. And as a manager, that's probably not a thing you can do yourself, but it's a conversation you can lead with HR. I've done it as a manager, right? Talking to people and getting that buy-in. So how do you use something like this? Let's go through a couple examples. So for the sake of this example, we're going to say 65 is the bottom of the band and 85th is the top. So we're going to pay everyone at this fictional company between the 65th and 85th percentile of Atlanta. Company's doing well. So let's say we're promoting someone from software engineer 1 to software engineer 2. They've been doing well. It's a brand new promotion. So what we'll do is we'll set them up to be close to the bottom of the band. So probably pay them like 104. And that gives them space as they progress to get raises, right? And as they get towards the top, because we're thinking about where they are on the career ladder, they'll be getting close to ready for promotion. Let's just run through another example. So you have a software engineer 4. They're solid, right? They're better than average, not quite ready to promote. So they're going to be somewhere between this kind of on target number in the middle, which is like, yeah, this is what someone at this level means. Like they're better than average. So maybe we'll give them around 160, right? It depends exactly when you look at their career ladder, how they've been doing. An aspect of this that's missing is equity, right? Equity is super important. It's really hard to figure out what numbers to set for each band, right? Depends a lot on your board politics, how the exec team thinks about funding, the stage of your company. But it's really important to set equity numbers for each level so that you can check and make sure people are getting fair amounts of equity. Because while the salary is the number of people understand better, in a startup or a successful Silicon Valley company, half or more of your compensation might be coming from equity. So it's really important as a leader to make sure that everyone is getting fair equity. And it's important as an employee to ask, what are the equity expectations for the level I'm at, right? And make sure that you have fair equity. So if you think about this, we've put a lot of thought into how much to pay someone, how much equity to give them, how to compensate them. But the person who you're managing, who you're having this conversation with, isn't going to know that. They're going to have that fear that they're one of those people with their hands raised at every company, right? Because once you've been burned like that, you're like, heck if I'm going to let someone do that to me again, right? That's just not okay. So the more you can make your salary bands transparent, the more people can trust that they're being fairly compensated. Or if they disagree with it, can figure out whether it's they disagree with what the market rates are in the city they're in, or whether they disagree with what where you think they are performance-wise, right? So the more transparent you can be, the more trust people are going to have in the system, and the more your conversations can be focused. You can't. The sad truth is, it's really hard to do transparent salary bands overnight, right? If you haven't been doing things systematically, your payroll's probably a mess. There's probably people outside of band all over the place. And you may not, as a company, be able to give everyone the raise you want to bring them into band right away, which is a hard truth, right? So the thing then to do is to work with your HR department, to work with the other leaders in your group, to figure out how you're going to move people into band, to have conversations with people who are out of band but are being paid too much, and being like, I'm sorry, you're not going to really get raises until you get promoted or until you show stronger performance because you negotiated really well when you signed on. And then there's going to be other people where you're going to be taking that money that those overpaid people usually would be getting in raises, and you're pouring it into the people who've been underpaid. It may take a couple years to get to the point where you can fully release your salary bands, depending on how much money your company has and how much ability you have to make big raises. But it's something you can work towards. It's very doable. I've seen it happen. There's even companies that you can go on their website and see how much you would get paid in different roles. I think GitLab has a calculator. Anyone in the government or most of education, their individual salaries are published. So you're going to get a lot of pushback and fear when you talk about transparency around salaries. It's super doable. It doesn't end the world. But you do have to be careful about it, and you do have to make sure people are in a good place before you make those numbers public. So some of you probably work at places where you do percentage raises, like, oh, the strong performers get 8% or 6% or whatever, and like medium 4, whatever the numbers are at your company. So I think percentage raises are BS. I think that they perpetuate inequality in terms of how well you were able to negotiate your initial offer, which has got all sorts of ties into bias, culture, you name it. BS. However, you may not be able to change the entire system at your company individually. What you can do is you can use the salary bands and the career ladder to come up with what you think someone should be paid. Use that to calculate a percentage and give that to HR. And when they say, that doesn't fit our guidelines, you can be like, well, here's my work. Here is why this is what this person should be paid. And it may be a conversation. You may not get exactly what you want. But yeah, BS. So that was a lot of information. Just going to put it together for a second. So go through the career ladder with someone. Don't rush it. Make sure it's a conversation that's focused around growth, their strengths, what projects do you want to work on together, how can they become even stronger. Go through it about once a quarter so people have that regular evaluation, but you're not focusing too much on someone's weak points. Adjust it for someone's confidence, right? When you're going through the career ladder and coloring it, you don't want to get into pedantic conversations of like, oh, should this be orange or should this be yellow? Doesn't matter. You're building shared context. But when you go to translate that into dollars, you want to make sure that the really shy, uncertain person on your team who's killing it and the really broad, like the confident person who maybe is not, like you want to adjust those colors to be more accurate, at least in your head, right? When you're kind of mapping them onto the salary band. Yeah, and once you figured out, say this person's like, you know, got 25% of their band, awesome. And you map it onto the pay, right? And if you try and think about it as math too much, it gets complicated. So once I set the band, I try and just drop the percentiles because it makes it easier to reason about. But someone in this room is probably like, my company doesn't have a career ladder. Or if we have a career ladder, it kind of sucks. It's not great. So let's go through how to create a career ladder. So this is the career ladder that we put together for Auth0. Jason actually helped with this. And what we did was first we worked on defining major themes. So these are the themes here. The ones we picked happen to be the why, like business context, why are you doing the work? Team dynamics, how well does the team interact? Is everyone's voice heard? Growth, individual growth of people on the team. And level of definition, how pre-digested and spoon-fed does a project have to be for the team to be successful? This happens to be a career ladder for managers. You can make a career ladder for anyone. You can pick whatever categories make sense for your company, your business, your values. The way I came up with them was reading through the company's values, reading through previous attempts at career ladders that didn't get off the ground at the company, looking at other career ladders online, reading through what people interview for and what they feel like makes a successful manager. You can pull this from anywhere. It doesn't have to be perfect. When you do this exercise, it'll become really obvious if you pick categories that don't work. Then what I did is I pulled together all the people who manage these people. So since this is a manager career ladder, I pulled together all the directors at the company in engineering. And we put stickies on here for qualities we think that someone should have. Didn't worry about what level. They could be behaviors, they could be skills, they could be outcomes. Just basically brainstorming. So all the directors put that stuff on there, color-coded them by what level, like is this junior, senior, mid-level? There were conversations, there were misunderstandings, we had to reword things, split some of them apart. Once we got that, I took it back and reworded it because it read like it was written by committee, because it was. So got rid of the duplicates, you know, a lot of massaging, reading it, making sure that the progression actually made sense and things didn't like loop back, you know, all that and stuff. Then what I did is I took it to the managers I work with. And we ran through it. We ran through it for about a month. We worked on color coding it like you saw before. We also like annotated it in bright pink with like stuff that we needed to change. And then came back and did a new draft of it, taking that change and feedback into account. Then I gave it to all the other directors to try with their managers, and actually rolled it out across the company. You probably noticed that I skipped 7. So when you roll out, we did do the leveling, but when you roll out a career ladder, if you're doing it across a whole department or even across your team, you probably want to negotiate ahead of time to have some extra budget for raises, because there's going to be people who've been ignored, who are under-leveled, and you're going to need to give raises to, right? So you're going to probably have an unusually large number of raises when you first roll out a career ladder, unless everyone in your company is over-leveled, and then you have a lot of hard conversations. And so how do you deal with people who are over-leveled? You have a couple options. One one option is you can just ignore it until it's performance review time, and then you can like put them on a PIP, and life is terrible. I don't recommend that one. The thing I recommend is having the hard conversation right when the career ladder comes out, right? Be like, hey, we changed the expectations out from under you. Not totally fair. We kind of were making up the levels before. We didn't really know what they meant. So you're not the level that we talked about before. We can either work with you to fix that, right? Or we can go ahead and adjust your technical title now, and with the knowledge that you can move up. You didn't do anything wrong. This was us leveling you inappropriately to start with. And you can give people a pay cut if you want. That's a harder conversation. Or you can just tell them they're not really going to get a raise until they're back, until their performance is in line with the title that got them that money, right? So it's a lot about setting expectations. And those are not fun conversations to have, but if you have them right away, you can have them in a way that doesn't put any blame on anyone and really make sure things are set up for success. Okay, so we talked about how to make a ladder, but how do you tell if the ladder's any good? Like, what makes a good ladder? In my mind, what makes a good ladder is it's a mix of behaviors and outcomes. Really, it has to be true, right? It can't just be stuff that's actually measurable precisely for the rules lawyers in your department, right? It has to match what you believe in your gut. If someone checks all the boxes, you have to be like, heck yeah, you're getting promoted. You're crushing it, right? So you can put outcomes in there. You can put behaviors, you can put skills. Yeah, people aren't going to get the opportunity to do all of those things depending on their role. It might not be a perfect fit. That's why we promoted 80 to 90% of the current level, right? No, you don't have to check all the boxes. We understand this is an imperfect tool, but it's way better than nothing. And you have to know when you've arrived. You can't put something on the career ladder like good communication. What does that mean? If you could put things like everyone on the team understands why their work matters and how it ties to the company missions. You can put something on there like people on other teams know what this team is working on. You can put that on there, because then you can be like, yeah, I'm doing that. No, I'm not. And talk about strategies instead of just good communication, right? So make it precise enough to be meaningful. And this is the best part. Your career ladder is the embodiment of what you value. It's literally what you're telling people is how you get paid. So you better put what you actually value as a company in there. If you don't put anything about inclusion or equity, you probably don't value it as a company. Not really, right? These are actual quotes from our manager career ladder. Like, put the stuff in there you want to see. And it's amazing how fast people's behavior will change when all of a sudden it's not like, oh, an optional thing on the side. It's like, no, this is how you get paid. That's how you make it real. That's how you make D&I more than something HR talks about, right? Or one way. I'm sure there's millions of ways, right? But this is my favorite one. So to start to close this out, this stuff matters, right? I'm not an expert in this. I'm not an HR professional. This is just something that I've done at a few companies I've been at because I've seen that no one had taken the time to stop and think about this in a thoughtful way. There's lots of different ways to approach this. Those of you in the room probably have some really interesting ideas from your company. We can probably build a system that's even stronger than this. What I ask you is to take this seriously, to be conscious, be thoughtful about this, right? Tech is the gateway to money in this culture, to influence, to building the structures that control how people live their daily lives. And we are the gatekeepers, right? And so if we do this wrong, we're not just shutting the door on the individuals on our team. If there's any bias or structural issues in that, we are building structural racism. We're building structural inequality, right? So like, spend time on this. This matters. I don't care how you do it, just do it well. So to continue the conversation, I actually made a pay equity channel on the Slack so we can all share tools and ideas that we've had. And I've saved us a bunch of time. We're only like 24 minutes into the 45-minute session, so we have a lot of time for questions and discussion because this is a super wise group, and I want to make sure that it's not just my thoughts that are getting shared. Questions? Discussion? Let's make it happen.
I was wondering, you mentioned one of the steps was testing the ladder. Can you talk some about how you do that?
Yeah, so what I did is I went to the leaders I work with, the managers I manage, and I said, hey, we have a new ladder. Do you mind working through it in our next one-on-one, or I can schedule some more time? I want to get your feedback. I really trust your opinions. And I made sure I tested it with some people who are more junior and some people who I viewed as more senior, so I could see if my intuition matched what the ladder was saying, because if it was wildly off, there was probably a problem somewhere. And then we just worked through it really thoughtfully. I also let people review it on their own and give comments, because some people are internal processors. Yeah.
What do you do in your experience when you disagree with the benchmarks? And what I mean by that is, we've been through VC tables, Mercer, Radford, we've been through all of them. There are systemic ways that the market views roles that are different than how we do. Like we find QA systemically undervalued, we find senior individual contributors undervalued relative to managers. And so if you put a lot of weight in these benchmarks, then you create tension with how you value roles within your company.
Yeah, and it gets even more, we're a distributed company, so we have people in different countries, and it gets really complicated when you look at international. I don't have all the answers here, but like it becomes a exec level conversation, right? Where you're like, we as a company value this role more than the market, so we're willing to pay more, right? We know we can get away with paying less, but we think that that's unfair, or I don't know. That's my approach. Has anyone else had to deal with that?
I think you're right. It often comes down to philosophy on payment structure. Like we as a company want to pay 75th percentile of market. We as a company want to shoot for 90th percentile of market. And then you can have those conversations about whether that percentile should be higher or lower.
Or you might say that we pay 65% of market in general, but for QA we're going to pay 75 because we think that that role is undervalued, or we believe that we're looking for people who are more skilled in that role, right? Because we're looking for particular qualities, and there's maybe two demographics that are getting shoved together into the same title.
What are some ways that you influence other managers to promote at the 80 to 90% of current level and 25 to 50% active level?
Yeah, so one thing I do is I'll ask all the managers to come, or all of my peers at the director level, to come and discuss it together, right? Like, so where do you think this person is? Why are you thinking this or that, right? And sometimes as you talk through it, it becomes really obvious that like one person's super strict and one person's really like just gunning to give everyone a promotion. And when it's just laid out there, it tends to become pretty obvious. You don't have to like do an Amazon stack ranking or something terrible like that, right? You can have it be a conversation. And if you have questions, like you could dig in, you have that colored ladder, right? So you can have, or however you're capturing it, right? Your Trello board with check marks or some artifact, right? So you can have a quick conversation back and forth and ask for examples and maybe be like, oh, but I saw this person do that. Was that unusual for them, or was that in line with what you usually see? It's not perfect. Yeah. This is not, there's as much art in this as science, but if there's a little more structure, then it can be closer to fair. Oh, sorry, you were first. Yeah.
So in line to what his question is, the levels doc or the career ladder doc helps align or level the playing field.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you, or what's the advice to managers who interpret that things differently? So like, you have a trait or you have something to check off. I may be yellow in one, but green in the other. Mm-hmm. So you have any advices on like for managers, like how do you?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important to have a strong first team, right? People talk about their team generally being the people they manage, but really your team needs to be your peers, right? You need to be communicating with your peers a ton and meeting with them and making sure you're on the same page. And as an employee, if you're being managed by people who are being inconsistent, that's harder, but you might be able to ask your manager what they're doing to make sure things are the same across managers, right? Or just collect data. Unfortunately, there's sometimes it's not a position of power, but.
So you said that this was something that was, or that you would work with startups on something like this, when you have like a small group that of developers there, you don't even have like a real managed structure there. It's kind of like, how much of this is really tapeable into like a startup like that?
I mean, I have done this with an organization that's 2 people. I've done this with an organization that's 70 people. For the 2-person one, I don't go through this much rigor, right? Like, you just kind of make a stickies board. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it helps set expectations, right? People in general feel really uncomfortable when they don't have a strong sense of what their job is and how they're doing. So having some way to give that feedback that doesn't take a ton of time. Like, you can put together a really rough sticky board in an afternoon and then walk through it with people. And then you have something that'll evolve as the company grows, and you won't ever get in that position where people are just horribly misaligned. Yeah.
Like, in small companies like that, do you even have like the idea of like the software engineer 1, 2, 3, 4, or is it usually?
Maybe not, right? Like, you have to pick how many roles make sense. Like, I ran a product org with 2 people, and I had a associate product manager and product manager roles, right? And then when I was going to need to promote someone, then I would probably make a senior product manager role for them as they were starting to ask what the next level was. You were.
Yes, so you mentioned having 80–90% of the current level and then a little bit of the level above. I really like that. I think about these, like in an ideal world, you would fill your level like a cup, and when you hit 1 ounce, you're at level 1. When you hit 2 ounces, you're at level 2. But in reality, we often have these splatters all over, maybe even several levels above you. So how do you capture when somebody has a little bit way, like in areas way above their level?
I celebrate the heck out of it. I ask them to coach other people in that, right? And I let them realize that they have something to teach, even if they're junior, right? Because like, we don't fit in boxes well. It's not, we're weird shapes. And so that's why I do that 80–90%, right? And so I'll color several layers past where the person currently is so that we can celebrate those things, right? And then when we're doing projects and stuff, I can be like, I know you're not excited about this project, but think about this. This is an opportunity to work on this thing that we were talking about, right? And maybe we can view it through that lens, and this is a chance to, I don't know, work on your group dynamic skills and making sure everyone has a voice, or whatever the thing is. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm interested if there's a way to have that impact the compensation.
Well, I mean, sure. If someone's got a whole bunch of stuff, way senior, I'm not just going to look at the level they're in and how green that is for where they are in that band, right? That's why someone might be all the way over on the right-hand side of the band, but not quite promoted yet, because there might be like a key column they're weak in, right? That you at least have to figure out mitigation strategies for before you feel like you can promote. But you can raise their comp because they're having a huge impact.
Yes.
I think there was someone back there first.
Yeah, what's a good jumping off point to create a career ladder? What kind of resources are there, examples to them?
Yeah, so Camille released all her stuff from Rent the Runway. So that's what I used as inspiration for this. If you go, I think the Rand's Leadership Slack, I think has an entire room on career ladder, on career management. If you Google it, different people are starting to release their ladders. Also, if you have a professional network of peers, you can ask them under Friendier to send their company's ladders and what they like and don't like about them. Stuff like that.
Levels.fyi, which is like a online repository of career ladders.
What was that, levels?
.fyi.
You got a question?
So how closely do you think that the data percentile should align with the levels. So let's say if you are, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, if you're over level in the pay percentile, but you're under level in the levels document, or the other way around, if you're under leveled on the if you're on the lower end of the pay band, but on the higher end of the.
Oh yeah. So you're asking, what do you do when someone's comp percentile doesn't match their performance percentile, basically?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would manage to bring them together, right? Lowering someone's salary is always a dicey proposition. I would tend to take that as a last resort, but you can cut off raises and coach someone and work on skills together, or if they're under, you can make sure a lot of your raise money goes to that person.
I have a question about that. Let's say you do find somebody who is really under-leveled. How do you keep them from having the reaction you mentioned of, well, I'm gonna quit because they haven't been valuing me. I've been here for 10 years, been making literally half of what my coworkers are making. How do you keep them?
Yeah.
And like, if they don't realize it, you're coming to tell them, oh, by the way, we should have been paying you double for the last couple of years, but we weren't. Don't leave though. Like.
Yeah, well, what you can come in and say like, hey, I've done an analysis. I think you're performing way above your level. I'm going to make sure you get a promotion and a good raise this quarter, and then like do it again as soon as you can, right? You don't have to tell them you think they were being paid half of what they deserve, right? Like, this is the hard thing about management, right? Like, complete transparency can sometimes be detrimental, but you really want to fix the problem, and you want to get to the place where you can do complete transparency, right? Because like, that person is trusting you, and the company has violated their trust, and they just don't know it yet. And like, that's terrible. I don't know, that's been my take.
Can you share some anecdotes and tips on separating competence and confidence? As the first-time manager, it's hard for me to know how my directs are doing, because I just don't have the experience of kind of seeing, as well as knowing how I'm doing as a manager.
Yeah, and like, that's super hard in interviewing. And so the question is how to separate confidence and competence. And like, man, I see people in interviewing cycles all the time, just interviewing for confidence. And I'm like, what are you doing? But once they're in the door, it's hard, but there's things you can do. I like spying on code reviews as a manager, right? Like PRs, like spot PRing, whether or not I leave comments. Like, just to get a sense of like, oh, what's going on? And in one-on-ones, like taking notes around what someone, like not status stuff, but like, oh, have they been coaching this other person a lot? Are they doing the type of work that's not showing up in stand-up, right? You can also keep a list from stand-up and sprint reviews and stuff about the big projects people have done. So if you go back and look at it, you have some kind of data to base decisions on. Peer reviews can be really useful, right? Those are some of the different things. Yeah, and sometimes pushing someone outside their comfort zone, like giving someone a project that's bigger than they maybe feel comfortable with. And then you can support them and see how they do, because I think that's the bigger thing. The opportunities tend to follow the confidence. And so being really conscious about that. Does anyone else have really good strategies around that one? Because it's a hard one.
I think in my experience when I've been interviewing developers, I focus more on the fundamentals, right? I think that gives a better sense of what they really know as far as technology goes, and see how adaptable they are and how them solve a problem. But as far as the personality piece of it, or competence, I guess, I just really have those more personal conversations, right? I just want to, of course, make them feel comfortable enough to really talk about themselves. And I think a lot of the times in interviews we get so stuck in our heads, right? We don't think about this just as a regular conversation.
Yeah.
Right? And I think when you have that type of scenario, you can't really portray what you really are thinking or what you really feel and really show. So I think a large part is really getting that comfortability established within me. As far as my own professional performance, I always go to my higher ups and do check-ins. Even if they're not giving it to me, I would go follow up and say, you know, I want to know how I'm doing. Because you can think you're performing well, they can think you're performing well, but unless you really, really know, then you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get it right. You get it right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice, but can you get a type up on that?
Yeah. And the confidence thing is such a big deal, right? Because there's different groups are socialized and rewarded and punished differently for showing confidence. So like it's super, super important to separate it.
Oh, you practice that a lot, you know, but, you know, so.
I was just going to share my techniques in interviewing. What I try to do is I always try to see how they apply a concept. So I get them to explain a concept in their words, and then I dig and say, show me you actually know how to use it. So I'll say, what's the difference between a good and great engineer? I don't care what you say. Use your words, use your ideas. This is for a manager role. And then I'll say, okay, show me a case where you coached someone from good to great. What did you do? Like, what were the steps you took? What happened? Great. Now give me a case where you failed, where someone was unable to make that transition, and what did you do? And you can quickly see someone who's really good at the concepts, who's confident, like, oh, this is what makes a great engineer. They do this, that, and then you say, okay, show me a success case. And they'll be like, well, they were struggling, and I moved them to a different Scrum team, and things worked out. And you're like, well, you move food around on your plate, and you like the results you got, but you don't know what you were doing or why. And so I always try to like push to show real application of those ideas.
I have a question.
Yeah. What's your question?
Kind of piggybacking off what you were saying. I've been in a situation where you feel like you have developers on your team who think perform well and make more money. Right? And at a certain point, they start to realize that, and it's a situation where the company is not looking to put out raises or promote things like that. So my question is, how do you, because you then become a motivator and mentor more than anything, right, to keep them positive and keep them productive, how do you deal with those type of situations and allow them and yourself to continue to grow, you know?
Yeah. How do you deal with people who are underpaid when there's not a lot of budget for raises? That's rough. I mean, you do the best you can, right? You find ways to keep people engaged and yell at your managers for more budget for raises too, right? Because fundamentally you want to make sure people are being fairly compensated. And sometimes there's moments where that's not the thing, and then you have to look for career opportunities, conferences you can send people to, time to take classes, right? Find other ways to reward people, visibility, whatever it is that it motivates that person. But yeah, fundamentally, it's also our responsibility to make sure people are paid fairly. And sometimes companies aren't doing well. And sometimes the thing you have to do is help someone find a job that's going to make more if that's what they need. I think we've got time for one more question. So.
What's the argument against full transparency with salary?
Yeah, what's the argument against just like publishing everyone's salary? I mean, personally, I don't mind getting there. I think you do have to work towards it, because if you just went from the chaos and terrible things that exist behind the scenes in most companies to being public overnight, half your company would quit. You're going to spend a lot of time arguing. But I think you can work there. And I think transparent salary bands are a nice place where people feel comfortable and it feels attainable. And then once you get there, you can push people further. But I don't tend to lead with that because people are freaked out enough about transparent salary bands. Cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to be around, and I'd love for this conversation to continue.